If I was to hire a buyer agent, the value to me would be that agent is, one, going to identify properties that I may not be able to find on the aggregator websites like Zillow, Realtor.com, Homes.com, Trulia. So because of their relationships in the industry, they may have knowledge of homes that are coming, that are in foreclosure, that expired 2 years ago, and I don't have access to as a buyer, but they do if they want to do some legwork for me and identify properties that meet my criteria that I would never have access to. So that would be the number one thing I would be looking for.
But this is my house, Mommy. So what I asked Mr. Kringle for, it is, I know it is.
Welcome to The Pursuit of Home, coming to you from New York City. This is real people buying real estate and their unique journey to get there. We share the tips, tricks, and frameworks to help you navigate the bumps in the road that you won't see on reality TV or social media, and which no one has talked about until now. These are the emotional, psychological, ethical, and even spiritual challenges you're more than likely to encounter yourself. Learn from experts who've been there and hang out with me, Scott Harris, your host, who's helped thousands of people buy homes in Manhattan over the last 2 decades. Welcome to The Pursuit of Home, where we explore what it really means to find and create a place to call home. Today, we're diving into something that's top of mind for a lot of buyers right now, how the real estate landscape is changing, and what you need to know to navigate it with confidence. I'm joined by Betsy Pepine, nationally recognized broker, serial entrepreneur, best-selling author, and someone who has spent her career helping people not just buy and sell homes, but like what a lot of great agents do around the country, help you rethink what homeownership can mean. So we're going to talk about how the market is shifting, what buyers should be doing differently, and how to make sure your agent is working for you. Betsy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's happy to be here, Scott.
Betsy, things seem to be changing really fast in the real estate market right now, in the real estate world. From where you sit in, and I believe it's Gainesville, Florida, what's the biggest change that buyers need to understand as they start their home buying search?
So from what I've seen, it's more understanding that interest rates are at a new normal. They're not going to return to the 2 to 3%. So buyers have to get off the sidelines, and many of them are. But we still don't have the typical volume of the buyers that are upsizing or downsizing. And if they really want to do that, again, the interest rates we're going to see in the sixes this year. I doubt we'll ever go back to what we saw. That was not people don't understand that, but that was not healthy for the economy, for housing. So I think that's the biggest adjustment, is having to understand that the interest rates are going to stabilize and remain higher than recent norms, but return to more historical norms. So you might have to adjust your criteria downward so that you can, I hate to make people house poor. So to make sure that you're not house poor, you might have to think of other things that could meet your needs instead of the larger house.
So if I'm hearing you right, it's adjusting expectations, but it's also in some way like distilling like what is really most important to you. Does that sound right?
Yeah. I mean, I think people are seeing, and we're seeing it definitely in Florida. 10 years ago, we would get people wanting 5,000-6,000 square foot houses. Now, I can't, since COVID, even during COVID, I can't remember the last person that has requested something over 4,500 square feet. And even that is not common. So I do think people are adjusting the size of the home that they really, truly need downward, which I think is wonderful. I've always thought that seeing in front of so many buyers, I swear the happiness is inversely correlated to the size of the home. I've seen that time.
I want to make sure I heard you right. So what I'm hearing you say is that as the house gets bigger, maybe there's some size. There's like a where the happiness meets the size of the home. Maybe there's like a perfect size depending on how big the family is. Does that sound right?
And I think for a variety of reasons, but one, in fact, I experienced it myself because I did live in a almost 5,000 square foot house at one time. You don't realize how much more of an effort you have to make to stay in connection with the people under the roof. When you start getting larger and you're having to text to see if somebody's home, it does change the dynamic of your family life. And my children really did not like living in a larger home, and everybody had their own wing, and you really didn't know who was here, who was not. And it did affect our family. And I've heard that. I've seen that time and again. So I mean, if you have a large family, great. Or if you just like a lot of space and you entertain a lot, absolutely. But I think sometimes, and I did this myself, I just thought, well, that's what you do. You know, the kids are getting older, you upgrade. And maybe that's not what you do.
Yeah, for people listening out there, as you're thinking about what's on that checklist, and you maybe arbitrarily have decided, oh, our family is X size, we need a certain square footage.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's about the layout rather than the actual square footage number. Now,
Yeah.
and that can be confusing to people to hear that kind of thing. Now, speaking of confusion, we also we're in the first year of the NAR settlement, and that's definitely created a lot of confusion for buyers. You know, I know buyers, I'm based in New York, buyers have heard about it here, but they're not quite sure what it means for them.
Mm-hmm.
How are you communicating to buyers what they need to understand about the changes as they decide to work with agents?
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting because, we're in Florida, but in some states, very little has changed. So like in North Carolina, to see property, you always had to get a buyer broker agreement signed before you could show anybody property. In Florida, that was not the case. But when we would have buyers coming in from North Carolina, they were surprised that there was nothing to sign. So it's all relative. But in the state of Florida, and if that's all you've ever known, it's a huge difference because we cannot physically show you a house unless you sign at least a touring agreement. And some buyers are still very resistant to that, thinking that they're obligated to certain things when they're really not. So it's really to protect everybody, to have full transparency. This is what we're offering you. This is the responsibilities we have to you and you to us. And there's a duration so that there's no ambiguity. So it does protect all the parties, but I think it does make some buyers uncomfortable signing something when they don't feel like they even know this person and they haven't established a rapport or trust yet. So it's just a conversation you have to have. Now, what some buyers are doing is the only way you can get around that is if you show up at an open house unattended without an agent. And so some buyers have said, well, I'll just wait for an open house, which is fine. The house might be gone by then, but it's fine to do that. But also understand that everything in either a touring agreement or a buyer broker agreement, it's all negotiable. So you're not being tied to anything that you don't want to be tied to. But it is just extra piece of documentation we have to do now to work with buyers. So that's, I think, the biggest thing on the onset. The other thing is that the Department of Justice wants us to decouple the commission. And so there is a myth that, especially on the selling side, that, oh, I don't have to pay the buyer agent's commission anymore. What a lot of people, I think, don't understand is they never had to. And so I think that's a myth. They never had to pay it. Most choose to pay it because they believe that their house will be shown more. And when you have a greater pool of buyers looking at your home, you get closer to true market value for your home. But on the flip side, because they've decoupled it, so now the seller and the seller and the listing agent decide at the time of the listing what the listing agent is going to be paid, and what, if anything, does the listing agent want to pay the buyer's agent. That may be, I want to pay them whatever number they want, a flat fee, a percentage, whatever they want. Or they may say, you know what, I don't know what I want to pay them because I haven't seen the buyer's offer yet, and I don't know what I'm netting. So how can I commit to a set amount or percentage when I don't know what the other terms of the offer are. So some sellers are saying, let's wait for the offer to come in. Where that comes in from the buyer is that when you sign an agreement with an agent, agents don't work for free. And so they want to make sure that they are going to be compensated for their time and effort, whether it's from you, from this listing agent or the seller, or a combination of the two. So that discussion is being talked about up front versus prior to August 17th of last year. It was really the buyer agent just took what was being offered through the MLS or what the seller was offering out. So that's a little bit of a change where the buying agent has to have that discussion with the buyer up front. I love it because it's full transparency. Nobody is surprised at the closing table. And it also has already started to weed out buyers who don't offer value to their clients because they don't know how to sell value. Either they're not offering it or they don't know how to communicate it to buyers.
Being buyer agents.
Buyer agents, I'm sorry.
Buyer
Yeah.
agents,
So
yeah.
they're exactly. So sorry, it's Scott Buyer's agent. So it is weeding out people who perhaps weren't as qualified to be buyer agents, right? So you really do have to sell yourself, and you're really competing now for a job working for the buyer.
Yeah, that's what I really want to talk about is that in some ways, I mean, people think, oh, it's going to create confusion. And if you're out there listening, it definitely does create it's confusing, and so as a buyer agent myself, and if you're out there looking for a buyer agent to represent you, the first thing is, you have to be able to explain something that an 8-year-old can understand. If you can't explain it to an 8-year-old, you need to go back to the basics and figure it out. Because I think that however complicated the concept is, you need to be able to break it down in language that anyone can understand. Mm-hmm. And I think ultimately, I guess my question is, are there any questions that you see buyers asking to how do they make sure that the agent's really working for them in this new landscape? Is there, I guess what you're saying is a litmus test. If they can explain this to them in a way that helps build trust and not make less trust, that's a really good sign that your agent is probably going to be a decent advocate. But any other ways that buyers should sort of measure how their agents are able to navigate this new environment?
I mean, it depends on what the buyer is looking for. But if I was to hire a buyer agent, the value to me would be that agent is, one, going to identify properties that I may not be able to find on the aggregator websites like Zillow, Realtor.com, Homes.com, Trulia. So because of their relationships in the industry, they may have knowledge of homes that are coming, that are in foreclosure, that expired 2 years ago, and I don't have access to as a buyer, but they do if they want to do some legwork for me and identify properties that meet my criteria that I would never have access to. So that would be the number one thing I would be looking for.
Do you have any stories? I mean, is there anything right now? Because off-market deals are, always in demand. But can you share a story of something like that recently that's happened for a buyer?
We do get that a lot. I mean, I remember one woman called and she wanted to move back to town, and she had left town probably 4 or 5 years ago, an executive at our healthcare system at the University of Florida. And we're looking for the criteria. And I had sold the house that she had left. And about 2 weeks in, I said, you know what? I'm going to call the owner of the house I sold her house to and just see, would they be willing to sell it back to her? Truly, pie in the sky thinking, but hey, the worst case is they're going to say no, they're not interested.
Right.
Well, lo and behold, I call and she's like, I can't believe you're calling me. And I didn't represent the buyer. I represented the seller. So I didn't even know this woman. She's like, I just called so-and-so, which is an agent in our county, because we want to list our home in 3 weeks, but I would much prefer to sell it back to the owner that had it before us. And my now buyer had built that house. So it's like that. I mean,
that's a wonderful story.
Is that to somebody, right?
That's a wonderful story.
Yeah.
And you launched your realty, Pepine Realty, in 2010, I believe. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
And so prior to that time, were you in real estate in Gainesville, or so it's only been 15 years, so you've built a lot of relationships during that time. But were you involved in real estate before? And I guess how do you leverage your relationships outside of just calling? Because that's a great story, but I'm guessing that the broker to broker relationships or agent to agent relationships are also important in your market.
And then we are. In Florida, it's different in every state. In Florida, you have to work under a broker for 2 years before you can be a broker. And so, but honestly, at 2 years, I did not feel competent to go out on my own in terms of being able to protect myself and my customers legally. And not that I'm an attorney, but just knowing all of the laws. And so I waited 4 years. So I was in real estate for 4 years, and then I became a broker, and then I started building the brokerage. So to answer that question, I was shocked at how I came from pharma, which is highly regulated, but I was really surprised at how much you have to know, because so many things can go wrong in real estate. So that's what I did. But leveraging relationships, yes, it's very. I mean, that's what this business is all about, relationships. And so I'm blessed. I was actually raised in this town, which really helps. So I knew a lot of people already, and my family's well established here. So we had a name and we had relationships that I was able to leverage when I went out on my own.
Gainesville is unique. It's a college town, so it has maybe a little bit more turnover than the average market. How does it compare to the rest of Florida, the rest of the country? Is it do you think, does it operate similarly to Florida, the rest of Florida, or how do you see it?
It doesn't. And that's what I like about it. People are always like, what? You're in Florida, you're not near a beach, and we're in the North Central, and we're 60 miles from kind of either coast, but we don't get hit by hurricanes, which is lovely. I mean, by the time a hurricane hits us, we're at level 2 or 3, which is wonderful. So we don't get the people on the coastline who now are moving up to Gainesville because they can't stand the storms that have passed through us recently. So that's nice. We're not impacted by the weather as much and what that does to housing. And then prices. So Miami, totally different market. Oh my gosh. We tend to follow Miami much slower. And compared to most of the major cities, I'm thinking Tampa, Orlando, and to some extent Jacksonville, and then Miami. We don't have the fluctuations. We're a much more stable market, which I love. So our peaks and valleys aren't as high and low. So for me, that's fine with me. Some people like that thrill, but I'd much prefer to have a more stable market. And so we do, but we do have a more seasonal market. So we have a really, like right now, we're starting really to ramp up. The next 3.5 months will be kind of crazy. We have a lull in the summer. We do have a smaller peak in the fall because everything's timed around either getting the professors or the students into school. So it kind of goes on the school calendar.
Got it. So you talked about stability. Of course, a big factor, a big piece of what real estate agents do is shake everything up and help people move into a new, and often this is one of the most stressful things that home buyers and sellers go through when they buy and sell homes. You wrote a book. It's called Breaking Boxes. That came out at the end of last year. I wanted to talk a little bit about it because, in a sense, this is, home buying, and what we talk about on this podcast is about people going through these transitions and all of the different things that they can go through. If buyers are feeling stuck right now, how do you help them break out of it? How do you... I mean, I guess before we even go there, can you tell us a little bit about like the premise of the book and then maybe how you see it related to real estate?
The book has nothing to do with real estate, to be honest with you. It's about my journey through real estate, through my life, feeling. I relate it to if you've ever had the misfortune of purchasing a mattress off of Amazon. It arrives at your door in a box. And you're thinking, oh my goodness, they sent me the wrong thing. How could the mattress fit in that box? And you lug the box inside your home, you rip it open, and lo and behold, 2 days later, there's a mattress that is, you know, the king size mattress, the size it was designed to be sitting in your living room. I felt like I was in that box, and that I had all these external forces, pressures, opinions, stereotypes, things that were pressing on me, that I wasn't living an authentic life. And so that's the journey of the book. But I found it in real estate as well, you know, just the idea of slapping labels on people and how detrimental that can be. So I've seen people do that with buyers. We do it with everybody, sadly. But I've seen agents do that with buyers. Now, that's not tolerated in our company, but, you know, we actually get buyers who are so grateful, and they say another agent wouldn't work with them because their price point was too low. And it's crazy. You know, I'm in business for the relationship. I tell my agents, I tell customers, I truly could care less if you buy or sell from us. My only goal is to establish trust with you, because I know if I establish trust, you will feel compelled to share me with your friends and family. That's my goal. So that's the premise of the book, is the boxes that we sometimes either find ourselves in or put others in.
Well, when people are going to find a home, I mean, I've interviewed people for this podcast who will tell me, okay, we bought this one house because we wanted to raise our kids, and it was all about, you know, they were playing the role of parents, and they needed to find the right school district and everything else. And then they go to a different stage of their life, and they came into some money, they sold their business, something else. They're like, wait a minute, like, we want to have a second home, or we want to have a bigger home, or something that reflects more who they feel they are now. I think a lot of people are, you know, the process of finding a new home is the same process of finding the most authentic version of yourself. So I think in some ways the home is almost like the launch pad for find the right home. It can help you be a more full expression of yourself.
Right. But to help buyers that feel stuck, you know, I always encourage people to get creative. There's so many ways.
Yeah, tell me more. I want to hear about this.
Well, I mean, there's so many options, you know. I also invest in real estate. So buy a duplex and rent out the other side and have that pay for your mortgage. I mean, live with your family if you need to. We're seeing a lot of that, multi-generational living, putting on ADUs, ancillary dwelling units, because our city just passed an ordinance that all properties they're automatically zoned for an ADU. So you can put an ADU on the back of your property. You know, the tiny houses. We're also seeing people who they thought they wanted to buy a single family home, but they realized once they did the numbers that it would make them house poor. So they're moving into condos, or manufactured housing, or they're moving further away from the city center, and that's okay. So there's just so many options. Just don't be stuck in, I have to have X, Y, and Z. I tell buyers all the time, there's no perfect house. You know, I always say, it'd be great if there was a cut and paste feature in housing, right? Cut this feature of this house, this of this, and create your own home. But even buyers who build new construction, at the closing table, there's always at least one thing they wish they had done differently by the time they close. So there's really no perfect house. And just, you know, try to relax your criteria and understand what it is not what features are you looking for, but what is it you're hoping for that house to accomplish for you and your family.
And yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the people that you're encountering. Is there one mistake that you're seeing buyers make right now, and something that they can do differently to kind of move forward as you're describing? You know, is there like an outdated buyer strategy that people should leave behind? You know, some kind of misconception that seems to show up again and again.
I think one I see all the time is that buyers think they should lowball, and then think that that's the best strategy at the beginning. Lowball, and then they can always counter.
Yeah.
And they don't realize that if a seller gets offended, then they're done. It doesn't matter what that buyer offers next, they're done. So that to me is not a great strategy. If you really want the house, not at all a great strategy. Just, you know, look at the comps. I offer within reason of that, but to go in lowball just because you're trying to see what that buyer will take, or you think that buyer is desperate, and also understanding the nuances. we talk about the market, but there's so many sub-markets within the market, especially by price point. So, for example, our luxury market right now is very much a buyer's market. We are highly saturated, inventories very high, days on the market's very high. But in the entry level starter home market, I would say from in our market, that's 250 to 500. Those homes are getting multiple offers. It's very much a seller's market. So don't read just the headlines and think that's applied. You can apply that to the price point you're in. You really have to rely on your agent to educate you on what's happening in your price point in your geographical area.
Okay, that's great. That's really, really helpful to people. So make sure you don't lowball sellers just because you think it's the right thing to do. It often is the opposite. Yeah. You create almost a permanent barrier between you and the seller, yeah. And then you can't break it down.
Yeah.
And so if your agent is telling you maybe we should bid a little closer to your final number,
yeah,
believe it.
You're right.
I would say as an agent that I often will tell people, put my back up against the wall. Mm-hmm. Let's go really close to what your best number is. Mm-hmm. And then I'll just say, this is your budget. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. I'm not going to twist your arm to pay more than you feel comfortable paying if you have a specific budget in mind.
Right.
That's okay.
I like to tell buyers, put yourself in the seller's position. This is like their baby. If you just utterly insulted someone's baby, they don't want to be your friend, right?
That's a good way to look at it. I love that. Well, after so long in real estate, and sounds like you having, raised kids and sold houses and everything else, what does home mean to you now? After everything you've experienced, you've written a book, you've launched, you have a philanthropy, you have a big presence in the Gainesville market. Personally, professionally, what does home mean to you now?
So that's interesting. So I alluded to the fact that I lived in this 5,000 square foot house. And my children were about to leave the nest, and I knew I did not want to be in the house. And so I, for about a year, looked for this perfect home and could not find it and was really frustrated with myself. In fact, I have a twin sister, and I called her and I said, I'm the broker of the American dream and I can't even find my own home. And I said, I grew up in this town, Gainesville, and I grew up in a home, and the house next door to me, my grandparents built. And so I got to grow up next to my grandparents. Wow. And so I said to my twin sister on the phone that night, I said, gosh, I just wish Graham's house would come up for sale. My grandmother had passed away. And the next morning, a gentleman had called me to ask me to come list his house. And I said, sure, whatever. And he gives me the address, and I froze. And I was like, is this Juan Manuel? And he's like, yes. And I said, I'm not coming to list your house. I'm going to come buy it. This was my grandmother's house. We had sold it to Juan Manuel 10 years before. And I threw all my negotiating skills out the window, wrote up a purchase and sale agreement, sped it over to his home. And I made it need to see the house. My grandfather built it. I knew this house inside and out. It had so many great memories for me. And he's like, well, I need to, it was May. Well, it was March. He's like, I need to stay till May. I said, fine, stay for free. Well, I'll close next week, stay for free. You take the money, go buy your house in Oregon where he was moving. And he's like, well, it might not pass inspection. I said, I don't care about inspections. I know this house. No, I'll waive the inspections. He's like, sounds great. Let me get back to you tomorrow. I need to run it by my realtor.
Oh, God.
I
just sleep that night.
I was so upset. Well, the next morning he called and he said that he accepted my offer. But when you asked me what home meant for me, like the minute I drove, and it's the house I'm in right now, it's like a warm hug welcomes me every time I drive up the driveway. And in fact, the first week we were in the house, and I didn't know how my girls were going to take downsizing that. I mean, my house is 1,600 square feet. I went from almost 5,000 to 1,600 square feet. Yeah. That's a huge downsize. The first night we were in the home, my one daughter came out and said, Mom, this feels like home. And it did. And it still does. I mean, it's the feeling you have, not the features of the home, but just the feeling. And it's in large part because I have so many wonderful memories for this house, but that's what home means to me. And you can usually see it in your buyer's eyes. I always tell my agents, we don't sell homes. We sell the relationship. The buyer, usually knows when they step into the foyer if this is a house for them. They feel it, they know it. You would never want to talk somebody into buying a home. That's the last thing we want to do.
That's such a great story. I tell my agents, and I believe that real estate agents have to go through what their clients go through. Not every 3 years, but on a regular enough basis to reconnect with what it feels like, both to go through that crazy transition, the buying and the selling and the stress of that, because we're meeting everyone at their most stressed, but also to know what it feels like to fall in love again.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, Betsy, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
And you work so closely with home buyers. So many are navigating these big life transitions. If you have any clients whose home buying journey really stands out, someone might be open to being on the podcast, joining me here at the Pursuit of Home to share their experience. I would love to talk to them. And that goes for anybody out there listening. If you want to talk about your home buying experience and what you're going through and maybe get a little coaching, even if we're not in your market, the point is that this experience is in many ways universal. Please be in touch. And Betsy, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Scott.
That's it for this episode of The Pursuit of Home. I hope today's conversation gave you insight, clarity, and maybe even a new way to think about your own home search. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to follow, rate, and review the show. It really helps us reach more people on their own journey to home ownership. The Pursuit of Home is proudly produced by Fame, the B2B podcast production agency. Find The Pursuit of Home on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere else you listen to podcasts. And if you want to connect, you can find me anytime on social media or at Magnetic. Till next time, happy home hunting.